The sound of a body hitting the mahogany floor echoed louder than the judge's gavel. Julia didn't just faint. She crumpled like a paper doll in a hurricane. From the plaintiff's bench, her husband, Robert, didn't flinch. But his mistress, Jessica. She smirked. It was the smile of a woman who thought she had just won the lottery, the mansion and the man. They thought Julia was broken. They thought the game was over. But they didn't know that inside Julia's clutch bag, a digital recorder was still running, and what it was about to play would send Robert to prison and wipe that smile off Jessica's face forever. This is the story of the most satisfying revenge in divorce court history. The divorce papers didn't come by mail. They came by courier, delivered to the front door of the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. Julia stood in the foyer, the cool marble chilling her bare feet, staring at the manila envelope in the courier's hand. She knew what it was. In high society, secrets didn't stay secret for long. Whispers had been circulating at the charity galas and the country club lunches for months. Whispers that Robert, her husband of 20 years, the CEO of Sterling Heart Pharmaceutical, had found a new muse. "Sign here, Mrs. Whittaker," the courier said, his eyes avoiding hers. He knew too. Everyone knew. Julia signed with a trembling hand. When she opened the heavy envelope in the kitchen, sipping her lukewarm coffee, the brutality of the text hit her like a physical blow. Robert wasn't just leaving her. He was eviscerating her. Irreconcilable differences. Infidelity on the part of the defendant. Julia dropped the mug. It shattered ceramic shards exploding across the floor. "Infidelity," she whispered to the empty room. On my part, it was a master stroke of gaslighting. Robert, the man who had spent the last 3 years away on business in Dubai and London, while actually shacked up in a penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton with his 24-year-old personal assistant, was suing her for cheating. She scrambled for her phone and dialed him. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Robert Whittaker. I'm busy building the future. Leave a message, Robert." "What is this?" she screamed into the voicemail, her voice cracking. "You're suing me. You're the one sleeping with Jessica. I have the credit card statements. I have the receipts from Cartier." 10 minutes later, her phone pinged. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from Wells Fargo. "Alert, your joint checking account, ending in 4490, has been frozen due to suspicious activity." Another ping. Chase Bank this time. "Alert, credit limit on card ending in 8812 has been reduced to $200. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. She tried to log into their investment accounts at Vanguard. Access denied. She tried the digital lock on the safe in the master bedroom closet, where she kept her emergency cash and grandmother's jewelry. The keypad flashed angry red. The code had been changed. She was being erased. Julia ran to the garage, grabbing her keys to the Range Rover. She needed to get to the bank. She needed to get a lawyer. She pressed the start button. The engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lit up with a message, "Remote immobilization active. Contact owner." She sat in the silent, leather-scented darkness of the car, hyperventilating. Robert wasn't just leaving her. He was laying siege. He knew she had given up her career as a corporate attorney 20 years ago to raise their children and support his rise to power. He knew she had no income of her own. He was banking on her helplessness. The garage door opened. Julia froze. A sleek black Porsche Panamera pulled into the bay, next to her dead Range Rover. The driver's door opened and out stepped Jessica. She was stunning. Julia had to admit that. Tall blonde, wearing a white Celine power suit that cost more than Julia's first car. She looked like a shark in human skin. Jessica walked over to the Range Rover and tapped on the glass. Julia rolled down the window, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. "Get out of the car, Julia," Jessica said. Her voice wasn't mean, it was dismissive, like she was talking to a maid who had missed a spot. "This is my house," Julia managed to say, though it sounded weak. "Get off my property." Jessica laughed, a tinkling, humorless sound. She reached into her Celine bag and pulled out a document. "Actually, as of an emergency injunction filed this morning regarding the preservation of assets during litigation. Robert has been granted exclusive use of the primary residence. You have 2 hours to vacate." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "You can't do this. My children grew up here." "The children are at boarding school, Julia. They're fine. Robert already called the headmaster at Choate to let them know their mother is having a mental health crisis." Jessica leaned in closer. Her perfume, Baccarat Rouge 540, the same scent Julia used to wear, cloying and suffocating. "Robert wants a clean break. If you fight this, he'll release the photos." "What photos?" Julia whispered. "The ones of you and that tennis instructor," Jessica lied smoothly. "Doctoring images is so easy these days with AI, isn't it? Who do you think the judge will believe, the billionaire philanthropist or the hysterical housewife?" Jessica smiled, showing perfect veneers. "Take the Honda Civic in the driveway. It's registered in your name. You can grab 2 suitcases. Security will be here at noon to escort you out." The Motel 6 on the outskirts of Bridgeport was a far cry from Greenwich. The neon sign buzzed incessantly, a red flicker that bled through the thin curtains of room 104. Julia sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the wall. It had been 3 weeks. 3 weeks of living on fast food, because she only had $400 in cash, the emergency stash she kept in a hollowed-out book that Robert had missed during his sweep of the house. Her lawyer, a court-appointed representative named Mr. Henderson, was overworked and underprepared. "Look, Mrs. Whitaker," Henderson had said during their brief phone call. "Your husband has retained Arthur Sterling. The man is a shark. He's painting you as unstable, financially irresponsible, and adulterous. They have evidence of large cash withdrawals you made over the years." "That was for the house," Julia had argued. "For the contractors, the landscapers Robert liked to pay in cash to avoid taxes." "Can you prove that or no?" she admitted. "He handled the books. Then it looks like embezzlement from the marital estate. He's offering a settlement. $51,000 and you sign an NDA. You walk away. You don't speak to the press, and you give up custody rights until you pass a psychological evaluation." $50,000. Julia laughed hysterically. "We are worth $300 million, Mr. Henderson. I helped him build that company. I wrote the original business plan for his first patent. I know. But right now you're homeless, and he's Robert Whitaker. If we go to trial, he's going to destroy you. He's threatening to release medical records implying you have a history of paranoia." Julia hung up the phone. She felt like she was drowning in the middle of the ocean, screaming at a passing cruise ship that refused to stop. She turned on the small TV in the corner of the room. The local news was on. Tonight at the Metro Gala, philanthropist Robert Whitaker made a stunning entrance with his new partner Jessica Miller, who dazzled in a vintage Dior gown. Whitaker announced a new charity initiative for mental health awareness. The irony tasted like bile. Julia watched as Robert, looking tan and fit, held Jessica's waist on the red carpet. Jessica was wearing her necklace. the sapphire pendant Robert had given Julia for their 10th anniversary. "That's mine," Julia whispered to the screen. She went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. She looked in the mirror. Dark circles bruised her eyes. Her hair was frizzy and unkempt. She looked exactly like the crazy woman Robert was painting her to be. Maybe she should just take the money. $50,000 could get her a small apartment. She could start over, get a job as a paralegal, disappear. She walked back to the bed and opened her suitcase to find a clean shirt. As she dug through the clothes she had hastily packed, her hand brushed against something hard and plastic at the bottom of the bag. She pulled it out. It was an old, clunky, digital voice recorder. She frowned. She hadn't used this in years. She used to use it when the kids were babies to record their first words, or when she was brainstorming ideas for the charity auctions. Why was it in her bag? She must have swept it off the dresser in her panic when Jessica gave her 2 hours to pack. She turned it on, expecting to hear a baby's coo or a grocery list. Instead, the tiny screen lit up with a timestamp from 3 weeks ago, the day she was kicked out. The device had been in voice activation mode. It must have been sitting on her dresser recording while she was frantically throwing clothes into the suitcase. But it didn't just record her packing. She pressed play. First, there was the sound of her own sobbing the zipper of the suitcase. Then the sound of a door opening. "Is she gone yet?" It was Robert's voice. Almost Jessica's voice replied. "She's in the closet grabbing those hideous sweaters." "Good. God, this took too long." "Did you find the ledger?" Julia froze. She held the recorder closer to her ear. "Yeah, it was in the safe like you said," Jessica replied. "I shredded the pages with the Cayman Island transfers. If the IRS ever found out you were funneling the pension fund into the offshore shell company, you'd get 20 years, Rob. They won't find it. Julia is the perfect scapegoat. That's why I had to freeze the accounts under her name first. If the audit happens, it looks like she was the one moving the money. That's why I need her to look mentally unstable. If she's crazy, no one listens to her when she claims innocence. You're a genius, baby. Ruthless, but a genius. Now, did you bring the necklace? I want to wear it to the gala. Here. Looks better on you anyway. Julia never had the neck for it. The recording ended with the sound of them kissing and laughing. Julia sat on the bed at the Motel 6, the silence of the room deafening. Her hand was gripping the recorder so tightly her knuckles were white. She wasn't drowning anymore. The water hadn't receded, but she had just learned how to breathe underwater. They hadn't just framed her for infidelity. They had framed her for corporate embezzlement and tax fraud. Robert was stealing from his own employees' pension funds and setting her up to take the fall. A slow, cold smile spread across Julia's face. It was the first time she had smiled in a month. She picked up her phone and dialed Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice steady and steel-hard. "Don't take the settlement. Mrs. Whitaker, please be reasonable. No. We go to court. And I want you to request that the judge allow multimedia evidence during the cross-examination." "Multimedia? What do you have?" "I have the truth," Julia said, "and I'm going to burn their house down with it." Julia knew Mr. Henderson meant well, but bringing a public defender to a knife fight against Arthur Sterling was suicide. She needed a weapon. She needed a shark who was hungry enough to bite a whale. She spent the last of her data plan searching for one name: Miranda Cross. 15 years ago, Miranda had been the fiercest litigator in the state, a woman who terrified corporate boards and made grown CEOs cry during depositions. But she had been blacklisted. Rumor had it she had gone after a corrupt judge who was part of the Old Boys Club and had her career torpedoed for it. She was disgraced practicing out of a strip mall in New Haven, handling drunk driving cases and petty disputes. Julia drove the rattling Honda Civic to the address listed online. It was a run-down brick building sandwiched between a laundromat and a vape shop. The sign on the door was Peeling, Cross & Associates. When Julia walked in, the office smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Miranda Cross sat behind a desk cluttered with files. She looked older than Julia remembered. Her hair was graying, and she wore a stained cardigan, but her eyes were still sharp like shards of flint. "I'm not hiring," Miranda said without looking up. "And if you're selling cookies, I'm diabetic." "I'm not selling anything," Julia said, closing the door behind her. "I'm Julia Whittaker, Robert Whittaker's wife." Miranda stopped writing. She slowly looked up, scanning Julia from her messy hair to her worn sneakers. "The billionaire's wife in a Motel 6 outfit. The news says you're having a breakdown. The news is paid for by my husband's PR team," Julia said. She walked forward and placed the digital recorder on the desk. "I have no money to pay you up front. I have no assets. They're all frozen. But I have this." Miranda eyed the recorder skeptically. "What is it?" "Insurance and revenge." Miranda sighed, leaning back in her creaking chair. "Look, honey, unless that's a recording of him confessing to murder, it's hearsay. In Connecticut, recording someone without their consent is tricky ground in civil court. Arthur Sterling will have it thrown out before you can press play." "It's not just a divorce case," Julia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's federal fraud, embezzlement, pension theft, and he admits to setting me up as the fall guy." Miranda went still. The air in the room changed. The tired, defeated lawyer vanished, and the predator re-emerged. She reached out and pressed play. They sat in silence as Robert and Jessica's voices filled the dusty office. Shredded the pages with the Cayman Island Trantas, funneling the pension fund. When the recording finished, Miranda didn't smile. She just stared at the device, her mind visibly calculating angles of attack. "This was recorded inadvertently?" Miranda asked sharply. "Yes, it was voice-activated. I didn't know it was on. I wasn't even in the room." "Good," Miranda said, standing up. "That falls under a specific exception regarding the expectation of privacy in a marital home during the process of vacating, specifically if the recording device was left in plain view. It's a grey area, but I can work in the grey. I live in the grey." She looked at Julia. "If we do this, they will come for you. They will try to destroy your reputation completely before we even get to trial. Are you ready for that?" Julia thought about Jessica driving her Porsche. She thought about Robert erasing 20 years of marriage for a younger model and a tax break. "I don't have a reputation anymore, Miranda," Julia said. "I have nothing left to lose." "Wrong." Miranda grinned, showing teeth. "You have $500 million to gain. Let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Miranda worked on a contingency basis. She would take 30% of the settlement, which, if they won, would be astronomical. But Robert wasn't idle. 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Julia came out of the motel to find her tires slashed. A note was stuck to the windshield. "Take the deal." That night, a drone hovered outside her motel window, filming her. Robert was trying to provoke a reaction. He wanted footage of crazy Julia screaming at the sky. Instead, Julia closed the curtains. She sat on the floor with Miranda, going over forensic accounting documents Miranda had pulled from deep archives. They were building a timeline. "You need to look the part," Miranda said, tossing a garment bag onto the bed. I called in a favor from an old client who owns a boutique. It's last season, but it's fierce. Julia opened the bag. It was a navy blue power suit, sharp angles and high collar. It looked like armor. "Tomorrow," Miranda said, "we don't walk into that courtroom as the victim. We walk in as the executioner." The Superior Court of Stamford was a fortress of stone and glass. On the morning of the trial, the steps were swarming with reporters. Robert's PR team had done their job well. The media was hungry for the story of the mad housewife versus the benevolent billionaire. When Robert's limousine pulled up, cameras flashed like lightning. Robert stepped out, looking solemn and dignified, in a charcoal Tom Ford suit. Jessica was beside him, demure, in a soft pink dress, playing the role of the supportive partner perfectly. She clutched his arm, looking at him with adoring, worried eyes. Then Julia arrived. She didn't have a limo. She stepped out of Miranda's beat-up sedan. But when she stood up, the cameras turned. She wasn't wearing the frantic, disheveled look the tabloids had promised. She wore the navy suit. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She wore no makeup to hide the dark circles. Instead, she wore them like war paint. She looked tired, yes, but she looked dangerous. Inside courtroom 4B was packed. The air conditioner hummed, but the atmosphere was stiflingly hot. Judge Harrison sat on the bench. He was an older man, known for being conservative and impatient with family drama. He peered over his spectacles as the bailiff called the court to order. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison nodded to Robert's lawyer, "you may proceed with your opening statement." Arthur Sterling stood up. He was a man who oozed expensive cologne and false sympathy. He walked to the jury box. Though this was a bench trial, he performed for the audience, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice smooth as silk. "This is a tragedy, plain and simple. My client, Mr. Whittaker, is a man of immense responsibility. He employs thousands. He saves lives through pharmaceutical innovation. But at home he has been living in a nightmare." Sterling pointed a manicured finger at Julia. "For years, Mrs. Whittaker has struggled with unmanaged jealousies, paranoia. She began to invent stories. She accused faithful employees of spying on her, and sadly she sought comfort outside the marriage." Sterling walked back to his table and picked up a stack of photos. "We have sworn affidavits from hotel staff. We have photographs enhanced for clarity, showing Mrs. Whittaker entering hotels with a man identified as her tennis instructor. We have bank records showing massive cash withdrawals she used to pay for this illicit affair. Mr. Whittaker tried to save her. He tried to get her help. But for the safety of the family estate and his children, he had to file for divorce." Julia sat stone still. Her fingernails dug into her palms so hard they drew blood. The lies were so detailed, so intricately woven. They had taken innocent events, a lunch with a contractor, a withdrawal for a garden renovation, and twisted them into a narrative of betrayal. Then Robert took the stand. He was magnificent. He cried on cue. A single manly tear rolled down his cheek when he talked about how much he still loved the woman she used to be. "I just want her to get help," Robert told the judge, his voice breaking. "I don't care about the money. I just want Julia to be safe. But I can't let her destroy the company with her instability." Judge Harrison looked sympathetic. "Thank you, Mr. Whittaker." Then it was Jessica's turn. She walked to the stand, her heels clicking on the floor. She swore on the Bible. "Ms. Miller," Sterling asked, "you are Mr. Whittaker's executive assistant, correct?" "Yes," Jessica said softly. "And when did you first notice Mrs. Whittaker's erratic behavior?" Jessica looked directly at Julia. A small, sad smile played on her lips. About 2 years ago. She would call the office screaming. She would threaten me. She said she would make up lies to the IRS to ruin Robert if he ever left her. She was obsessed with destroying him. Miranda leaned over to Julia. Stay calm. Let them pile it on. The higher the tower of lies, the harder it falls. But Julia was struggling. The room was spinning. The sheer weight of the malice was crushing her chest. She looked at Robert, who was whispering something to Sterling and chuckling. He looked so comfortable, so invincible. And, Jessica continued, dropping the bombshell, Julia actually came to my apartment 3 months ago. She was drunk. She tried to bribe me to spy on Robert. She offered me jewelry. When I refused, she attacked me. Objection, Miranda shouted, standing up. This is pure fabrication. I have the police report filed that night. Sterling shouted back, waving a piece of paper. It was a forgery. Julia knew it. They had bought a police report. They had bought the truth. The room began to tilt. The buzzing of the lights grew into a roar in Julia's ears. She attacked me. The words echoed. The judge was saying something gavel-banging. Robert was looking at her, his eyes cold and dead-mouthing the words. You lose. The oxygen left the room. Julia tried to stand up, to protest, to scream that it was a lie, but her legs had turned to water. The darkness encroached from the edges of her vision. Mrs. Whittaker, the judge asked. Julia swayed. The last thing she saw was Jessica's smirk, a triumphant, cruel curl of the lips. Then the floor rushed up to meet her. Thud. Medical, someone screamed. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Julia lay on the floor, the cold wood against her cheek. She wasn't fully unconscious, but she was paralyzed by the shock, her body shutting down under the stress. Through the haze, she heard Jessica's voice, low and close, as if she had rushed over to help. Poor thing, Jessica whispered, pretending to check Julia's pulse, but actually pinching her arm. She just couldn't handle the truth. Then a hand gripped Julia's shoulder. It wasn't Jessica. It was Miranda. Get up, Miranda hissed into her ear, her voice fierce. Do not let them see you bleed. Get up, Julia. It's time. The bailiffs were rushing over. The judge was calling for a recess, but Julia's eyes snapped open. The fainting spell had lasted only 10 seconds, but it had felt like a lifetime. In that darkness, something in Julia had snapped. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. She pushed herself up. The courtroom went silent. She stood up, shaky but upright. She brushed the dust off her knees. She looked at the judge, then at Robert, then at Jessica. I'm fine, Your Honor, Julia said, her voice raspy, but loud enough to reach the back of the room. I don't need a recess. She turned to Miranda. Play it. Mrs. Whittaker, Judge Harrison warned. You just collapsed. We should adjourn. No, Julia said. She walked back to her table, her eyes locked on Jessica's. My husband and his mistress just testified that I am mentally unstable, paranoid, and a liar. They claimed I invented stories about financial crimes. Mrs. Whittaker, this is out of order, Sterling shouted. Your Honor, Miranda Cross stepped forward, her voice booming. We would like to submit a piece of rebuttal evidence. Exhibit A. We haven't seen this evidence, Sterling protested. This is trial by ambush. It is impeachment evidence, Your Honor, Miranda argued calmly, directly contradicting the witness testimony given under oath 5 minutes ago, regarding the plaintiff's mental state and the nature of their relationship. Judge Harrison looked at Julia standing there, pale but defiant. He looked at the frantic Sterling. Curiosity won out. "I'll allow it," the judge said, "but be quick." Miranda pulled a small speaker from her bag and plugged in the digital recorder. Jessica's smile faltered. Robert stopped chuckling. He recognized the device. He had seen it on the dresser in the guest room years ago. "Stop!" Robert shouted, standing up. "That's private property. Play it." Miranda pressed the button. The courtroom fell deathly silent. And then Robert's voice, clear as a bell, boomed through the speakers. "Is she gone yet?" Jessica's voice followed. "Almost. She's in the closet, grabbing those hideous sweaters." Robert's face went white. Jessica froze her hand, flying to her mouth. "Did you find the ledger?" "I shredded the pages with the Cayman Island transfers. If the audit happens, it looks like she was the one moving the money." The gasps from the gallery were audible. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously on their phones. Judge Harrison's eyes went wide. He looked from the recorder to Robert. "That's why I need her to look mentally unstable. If she's crazy, no one listens to her." On the recording, they laughed. In the courtroom, no one was laughing. The recording ended. Julia stood tall. She looked at Jessica, whose smirk had dissolved into a mask of pure terror. "You were saying, Miss Miller," Julia asked softly, "something about me being paranoid." The silence in courtroom 4B was shattered, not by a gavel, but by Robert Whittaker. "It's a deep fake," Robert roared, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a trembling finger at Julia. "She used AI. She synthesized my voice. This is inadmissible. It's a fraud." Arthur Sterling. His high-priced lawyer looked like he was about to vomit. He was a shark, yes, but he was a shark who knew when the water had turned into concrete. He knew that the metadata on that digital recorder would prove exactly when it was recorded. If he pushed the fake narrative and was proven wrong, he wouldn't just lose the case. He would be disbarred. "Sit down, Mr. Whittaker." Judge Harrison barked, his patience evaporated. The judge turned his gaze to Jessica. She was still on the witness stand, frozen. The color had drained from her face so completely, she looked like a wax figure. "Some Miller," the judge said, his voice dangerously low. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer, because perjury carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years in the state of Connecticut. Did you or did you not shred documents related to offshore transfers?" Jessica's eyes darted to Robert. He was glaring at her, a silent command in his eyes. "Keep your mouth shut." But Jessica wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was an opportunist, and opportunists don't go down with the ship. They look for the lifeboats. She looked at the recorder on the table. She looked at Julia, who was watching her with an expression of icy pity. "He told me to," Jessica whispered. "Objection," Robert screamed. "She's lying. I'm not lying." Jessica shrieked, her composure shattering. She stood up in the witness box, tears streaming down her face. "He made me do it. He said if I didn't get rid of the ledgers, he'd blame it all on me. He said he'd ruin me like he ruined Julia. Order, order in this court." Judge Harrison slammed the gavel down so hard the wood splintered. Bailiffs moved in, flanking Robert, who looked like he was about to charge the witness stand. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "your client is effectively remanded into custody for contempt of court. And regarding the admissions heard on that tape and corroborated by the witness stand issuing an immediate referral to the district attorney's office and the SEC. The judge turned to Julia. His expression softened. Mrs. Whittaker, I am dissolving the previous injunctions against you. The freezing orders on your assets are lifted immediately. Furthermore, I am granting you temporary, exclusive possession of the marital residence in Greenwich until this trial concludes. Mr. Whittaker, you are to vacate the property effectively immediately. Robert struggled as a bailiff grabbed his arm. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I am Sterling Hart, Pharmaceutical. I own this town. Not anymore, Mr. Whittaker, Julia said. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a woman who had already walked through fire. Now get out of my house. As they dragged Robert out of the courtroom, he locked eyes with Julia. There was no love left, only a pure distillation of hatred. But for the first time in 20 years, Julia didn't look away. She held his gaze until the double doors swung shut behind him. Miranda Cross packed up the recorder. She looked at Arthur Sterling, who was frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, trying to escape the reporters already banging on the doors. Nice suit, Artie, Miranda quipped. Hope it looks good at the disciplinary hearing. Julia walked out of the courthouse and into a wall of flashbulbs. The narrative had flipped in an instant. The reporters who had called her crazy an hour ago were now shouting questions about the hero wife who took down a corrupt CEO. Mrs. Whittaker. How did you know? Mrs. Whittaker. Is it true he stole from the pension fund? Julia ignored them. She walked straight to Miranda's beat-up sedan. Where to? Miranda asked, starting the engine. The bank, Julia said. And then the house. I have some locks to change. But the victory wasn't clean. As they drove away, Julia's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you won. You just started a war. Watch your back. Julia showed the phone to Miranda. He has friends, Miranda warned. Powerful friends. The board members of Sterling Hart aren't going to like their stock plummeting. You're a liability to a lot of rich people right now. Good, Julia said, staring out the window at the passing city. Let them come. The return to the Greenwich estate was surreal. The security guards who had escorted her off the property 3 weeks ago now opened the gates with sheepish expressions. They knew who signed the checks now. Julia walked into the foyer. It smelled of Jessica's perfume. She walked into the living room and saw the changes. The family photos, pictures of the kids their wedding portrait were gone, replaced by modern, soulless, abstract art Jessica had clearly chosen. Julia ripped a painting off the wall and threw it into the hallway. Get a cleaning crew, Julia told the head housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, who was looking at her with teary eyes. I want every trace of that woman scrubbed from this house. Burn the sheets, burn the towels. If she touched it, I don't want to see it. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Higgins said, clearly delighted. Welcome home, Mrs. Whittaker. But there was no time to rest. The next morning, the driveway wasn't filled with luxury cars. It was filled with black SUVs. Federal agents. Agent Thomas Garrett of the FBI was a tall, severe man with a buzz cut and a suit that looked like it was made of concrete. He sat in Julia's library, his badge on the table. Mrs. Whittaker, Garrett said, the recording you played in court. It's compelling. But it's not enough to convict on the federal charges. We need the physical evidence, the ledger Ms. Miller mentioned. She said she shredded it, Julia said. She shredded the pages regarding the Cayman transfers, Garrett corrected. But Robert Whittaker is a meticulous man. Men like him don't destroy their only leverage. He would have kept a digital backup. A break glass in case of emergency drive. If we don't find it, he might cut a deal. He might get off with a slap on the wrist and a fine. He stole from his employees, Julia said, anger flaring. He destroyed families. We know, but without the data, it's his word against a mistress who is trying to save her own skin. We need the hard drive. Julia closed her eyes, thinking. Where would he hide it? Robert was arrogant, but he was paranoid. He wouldn't keep it at the office. He wouldn't keep it in the safe that Jessica knew about. The wine cellar, Julia whispered. Agent Garrett frowned. We swept the cellar. Nothing there. Not in the cellar, Julia said, standing up. Behind it. She led them down to the basement, to the climate-controlled vault, where Robert kept thousands of bottles of vintage wine. He loved to show this room off to guests. It was his pride and joy. Julia walked to the back row, to a dusty rack of French Bordeaux from 1982. Robert isn't sentimental about people, Julia said, running her hand along the cool bricks. He's sentimental about things. When we bought this house, he insisted on doing the renovations to the cellar himself. He spent weeks down here, alone. She counted 3 bricks up from the floor, then 4 over. She pushed. Nothing happened. Mrs. Whittaker, Garrett asked. Wait, she murmured. She remembered something. A date. Not their anniversary, he wouldn't care about that. The day he made his first million. October 14th. She pushed the 10th brick on the 14th row. A soft click echoed. A section of the wall disguised perfectly as mortar and stone popped open. Inside was a small fireproof safe. Jackpot, Agent Garrett muttered. But the safe was biometric. It needed a fingerprint. We'll need a warrant to force him to open this, Garrett said. It could take days. By then his lawyers could file injunctions to block us. You don't need him, Julia said. She reached into her pocket. When she had been packing her things 3 weeks ago, she hadn't just accidentally grabbed the recorder. She had grabbed a small box from Robert's bedside table, a box containing his spare grooming kit. She pulled out a silver hairbrush. It was full of Robert's hair. Can you lift a print from the handle? Julia asked. Garrett looked at her with newfound respect. Mrs. Whittaker, you really should have been a detective. The tech team went to work. 20 minutes later, they had a partial print. They pressed the synthesized overlay against the scanner. Beep. Green light. The safe swung open. Inside, there was no money. Just a single, black external hard drive and a passport. Julia picked up the passport. It wasn't American. It was a passport for St. Kitts and Nevis under the name Julian Thorne. He was planning to run, Julia realized. He wasn't just hiding money. He was planning to disappear. Garrett plugged the drive into his ruggedized laptop. Rows of data scrolled across the screen. Bank accounts in Zurich shell companies in Panama, and a direct link to the pension fund withdrawals. This is it, Garrett said. This is everything. This is life in prison. Just then, Julia's phone rang. It was Robert. He was out on bail. Of course he was. A man with his resources didn't stay in a cell for long, even with the FBI circling. Don't answer it, Garrett warned. Julia ignored him. She swiped answer and put it on speaker. Hello, Robert. Julia. His voice was ragged, desperate. He sounded like a cornered animal. Listen to me. You need to stop this. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm standing in the wine cellar. The agents just opened your wall safe. There was a long silence on the other end. A silence so heavy, it felt like it had mass. Julia, Robert whispered, if you give that drive to them, The people I work with. They aren't just bankers. They're dangerous. You're putting yourself in the crosshairs. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Robert. It's not me you should be afraid of. I was laundering money for the Kartsev syndicate Russians. Julia, if I go down, they lose access to their accounts. They will come for you. They will come for the kids. Agent Garrett's eyes went wide. He signaled for his team to trace the call. The kids are safe, Julia said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. I already moved them. And as for the Russians, maybe they should be angry at the man who was sloppy enough to get caught by his wife. Julia, please, we can make a deal. Half. I'll give you half of everything. Just destroy the drive. I don't want your money, Robert. I want your life. I want you to rot. She hung up. Agent Garrett looked at her. He just confessed to money laundering for organized crime. That puts you in immediate danger. We need to put you in protective custody. No, Julia said. I'm done hiding. If they want me, let them come. But I have one more thing to do before I disappear into your witness protection program. What's that? I have a meeting with the board of directors of Sterling Heart. Julia smoothed her jacket. I own 15% of the company, in my own name, a wedding gift from his father that Robert couldn't touch, and with Robert's shares frozen by the feds, I'm the majority vote. Mrs. Whitaker, that's insane. You need to go to a safe house. I'm going to the boardroom Agent Garrett. I'm going to fire him. Publicly. The headquarters of Sterling Heart Pharmaceutical was a 50-story glass needle piercing the sky of downtown Stamford. For 20 years, Julia had only visited this building as a guest, the smiling wife on Robert's arm at holiday parties, the ornament to his success. Today she was walking in to take it. She stepped out of the black FBI SUV flanked by Agent Garrett and 2 other federal officers. She wore the same navy suit she had worn in court, but now she wore sunglasses to block the blinding flash of the paparazzi swarming the plaza. Mrs. Whitaker, are you taking over the company? Mrs. Whitaker, are the rumors about the Russian mob true? Julia didn't answer. She pushed through the revolving doors, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished granite of the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, who had always looked down on Julia, dropped her phone. Mrs. Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker said you were banned from the premises, Chloe stammered. Mr. Whitaker doesn't work here anymore, Julia said without breaking stride. Call the boardroom. Tell them the acting chairwoman has arrived. She took the private elevator to the 50th floor. The silence in the elevator was heavy. You know this is dangerous, Agent Garrett said, checking his earpiece. We have reports of private security contractors moving in the building. Robert called in his own muscle. Let them come, Julia said, watching the floor numbers climb. He's a bully, Agent Garrett, and bullies crumble when you punch back. The elevator doors slid open. Standing in the hallway were 2 massive security guards, arms crossed. Ma'am, the board is in a closed session, one of them rumbled. You're not on the list. Move, Agent Garrett said, flashing his badge. Federal investigation. Obstruction of justice is a felony. Do you want to go to jail for $20 an hour? The guards hesitated. They looked at the badge, then at Julia's steely expression. They stepped aside. Julia pushed open the heavy double doors to the boardroom. The room fell silent. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around the long oval table. At the head of the table sat Robert. He was out on bail, looking disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes wild. He had been in the middle of a shouting match with the CFO. When he saw Julia, his face twisted into a snarl. Security, Robert screamed. Get her out of here, she's trespassing. Sit down, Robert. Julia said, her voice calm and projecting to the back of the room. She walked to the opposite end of the table. You have no authority here. Robert slammed his fist on the table. I built this. I am Sterling Hart. You are a liability, Julia said. She tossed a folder onto the table. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped in front of the lead independent director, a stern man named Arthur Pence. What is this? Pence asked. That Gimpwall, Julia said, is a copy of the federal indictment being unsealed this afternoon. Money laundering, RICO charges, conspiracy to commit fraud, and... She paused for effect, looking directly at Robert. Solicitation of murder. The room gasped. Robert went pale. That's a lie, Robert shouted. Is it? Julia asked. Agent Garrett. Garrett stepped forward. We found the communications on the hard drive from your wine cellar, Mr. Whitaker. Emails to a contractor asking for a permanent solution to the Julia problem once the divorce was finalized. The board members recoiled from Robert as if he were radioactive. Gentlemen, ladies, Julia addressed the board. As of this morning, the SEC has frozen Robert's voting shares. My 15% interest, combined with the emergency proxy votes from the institutional investors who are terrified of their stock going to zero, gives me the majority. She walked slowly toward Robert. He looked small now. The titan of industry was just a desperate man in a sweaty shirt. I am calling for a motion, Julia said. Immediate termination of Robert Whitaker as CEO chairman and from the board of directors, for cause. Seconded, Pence said immediately. All in favor? Julia asked. Every hand in the room went up. Even Robert's staunchest allies voted against him to save their own skins. The motion carries, Julia said. She stopped right next to Robert's chair. You're in my seat. Robert looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Julia, please. I built this for us, for the family. No, Robert. She leaned down, whispering, so only he could hear. You built it for your ego, and you destroyed the family to keep it. Now you lose both. Get up, Agent Garrett ordered, pulling handcuffs from his belt. No. Robert scrambled back, knocking his chair over. You can't arrest me here. I have rights. I have... The doors burst open again. But it wasn't police. It was 3 men in dark suits, moving with military precision. The private security Robert had hired. Get him out of here! Robert screamed to the men. Get me to the helicopter on the roof! The men looked at Robert. Then they looked at Agent Garrett, who had his hand on his holster. They looked at Julia, who stood unmoving, unafraid. One of the mercenaries smirked. Sorry, Mr. Whitaker. The check bounced. They turned around and walked out. Robert slumped against the wall, defeated. The reality of his financial ruin hit him. He had frozen Julia's assets, but the feds had frozen his. He couldn't moot his protectors. Agent Garrett snapped the cuffs on Robert's wrists. The click echoed through the silent boardroom. As they marched him out, Robert stopped at the door and looked back at Julia. She was standing at the head of the table, her hands resting on the leather chair. She didn't look back. She was already looking at the quarterly reports. Mrs. Whitaker, Arthur Pence asked tentatively. The stock is down 14% in pre-market trading. The press is calling it a death spiral. What do we do? Julia sat down in the CEO's chair. It fit her perfectly. We rebrand, Julia said, opening the file. We apologize. We open the books to the feds, and we pay back every cent Robert stole from the employee pension fund with interest. We show the world that Sterling Hart isn't Robert Whitaker. It's the people he tried to rob. She looked up at the board, her eyes clear and sharp. And one more thing, she added. Get that name off the building. From now on, it's just Heart Pharmaceuticals. The sterling is gone. Outside the window, a helicopter took off, but Robert wasn't on it. Below in the plaza, the police sirens wailed a song of justice finally arriving. Julia took a deep breath. For the first time in 20 years, the air didn't taste like fear. It tasted like freedom. The downfall of Robert Whittaker was swift and absolute. The hidden recording trial became the most studied case in modern legal history. Robert was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The Russian connection he bragged about turned out to be his undoing. They testified against him to reduce their own sentences. Jessica didn't escape unscathed. While she avoided prison by turning state's witness, her reputation was incinerated. The last time Julia saw her, Jessica was working the front desk at a budget gym in New Jersey, looking tired and old, the designer clothes long gone. As for Julia, she didn't just survive. She evolved. She led Heart Pharmaceuticals through the most transparent audit in corporate history, restoring the pension fund and earning the loyalty of the workforce. She started a foundation for women, navigating high-conflict divorces, providing top-tier legal aid to those who couldn't afford a Miranda Cross. She never remarried. She didn't need to. She had her company, her children, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing that when the gavel slammed down, she was the one holding the handle. She had passed out in court, weak and broken. But she woke up a warrior. And as she looked out over the city from her office, Julia smiled. It was the smile of a woman who knew that the best revenge wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. And that is the story of how one forgotten voice recorder brought down $1 billion empire. Julia proved that you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. You never know when they're hitting record. If this story of ultimate karma gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Julia's shoes? Would you have taken the settlement or fought for the truth? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss another story of shocking betrayal and sweet revenge. Thanks for watching, and remember the truth always comes out.